For the first 200 years of Christianity, almost nobody wore a cross. Think about that. The single most recognizable symbol in the Western world, the image that defines an entire global religion, worn around 2 billion necks, raised on top of nearly every church on earth, was barely used by the actual followers of Jesus for the first 2 centuries after his death. Why would they avoid it? Because the cross was not a holy symbol to a first-century Roman. It was an execution device. Using it openly would have been roughly equivalent to a modern religious movement adopting the electric chair as its primary icon and wearing tiny gold chairs around their necks. Instead, the earliest Christians used a fish. A simple 2-curved-line fish, scratched into stone, drawn in the dust, carved discreetly into the walls of catacombs. It was not decorative, it was a password. A way for persecuted believers to silently identify each other in a world where openly admitting to Christianity could get you killed. The cross came later, much later. And when it finally arrived as the dominant Christian symbol, it arrived through the actions of an emperor who, by his own later admission, saw a sign in the sky before a battle and decided to gamble his empire on it. This is the story of how Christianity built its visual language, not in a single moment of divine inspiration, but piece by piece, century by century, often borrowing directly from the very religions it was replacing. The halo around the saints' heads, the shape of the rosary, the protective medallions still worn today, even the holy water at the entrance of every Catholic church. None of it appeared from nowhere. Every symbol has a history, and most of those histories will surprise you. The fish that came before the cross. The symbol is called the Ichthys, the Greek word for fish. 2 simple arcs intersecting to form the outline of a fish. You have seen it on car bumpers. You may not know, it is one of the oldest visual codes in Christian history. The mechanism behind it is an acrostic. The Greek letters that spell times Ichthys, times iota, chi, theta, upsilon, sigma stand for a complete theological statement. Iesus Christos Theouios Soter. Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. A persecuted minority needed a way to identify fellow believers without exposing themselves to neighbors, soldiers, or informants who could report them to Roman authorities. The story, likely more legend than verified history, but persistent across early Christian tradition, describes one believer drawing a single curved arc in the dirt. If the other person was a fellow Christian, they completed the second arc, forming the fish. If they were not, the line meant nothing, just an idle mark in the sand. Whether or not that specific exchange ever happened exactly this way, the symbol itself is verified extensively in early Christian archaeology. It appears in the Roman catacombs, in private homes identified as early house churches, on burial markers, and on small portable objects that scholars believe functioned as identification tokens between traveling Christians in different cities. Why a fish specifically? The choice was not arbitrary. Several of Jesus' 12 disciples were fishermen by trade. Jesus describes his mission to them using fishing language directly. I will make you fishers of men. The miraculous catch of fish appears at pivotal moments in the gospel narratives. Bread and fish are the elements of the feeding of the multitudes. The symbol carried genuine theological weight while remaining visually unremarkable enough to pass as decoration to anyone who did not already know what it meant. This is the opposite design philosophy from the cross as it exists today. The cross is meant to be seen, recognized, and understood instantly. The fish was meant to be invisible to outsiders and meaningful only to insiders. For roughly 2 centuries, this was Christianity's primary visual identity. Deliberately hidden, coded, and safe. That changed permanently in the 4th century, and it changed because of a single battle. The emperor who saw a sign. In the year 312, 2 Roman generals were fighting for control of the western half of the Roman Empire. One of them was a man named Constantine. According to multiple ancient sources, most notably the Christian historian Eusebius, writing based on what he claimed was a direct account from Constantine himself, the night before the decisive battle at the Milvian bridge outside Rome, Constantine had a vision. A cross of light appeared in the sky, accompanied by the words, in Greek, on teutonika, in this sign, conquer. Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint a Christian symbol on their shields before the battle. He won decisively. His rival drowned in the Tiber River, attempting to flee. Whatever actually happened that night, and historians remain divided on how literally to take Eusebius's account, the practical outcome is not in dispute. Constantine became the first Roman emperor to actively favor Christianity. The following year, the Edict of Milan granted Christians legal toleration throughout the empire, ending centuries of intermittent persecution. The symbol Constantine actually used, it was not initially the cross as we picture it today. The symbol associated with Constantine's vision and subsequently placed on Roman military standards was the Chi-Rho, the first two Greek letters of Christ, Chi and Rho, superimposed to form a monogram that looks something like a P crossed with an X. This symbol, called the labarum, when displayed on a military standard, became the first openly displayed Christian symbol in Roman public life. It appeared on coins, on shields, on imperial banners. The cross itself, in its now familiar form, took longer to become standard. There was, understandably, a lingering discomfort with publicly displaying an instrument of execution as a devotional object. For decades after Constantine's conversion, Christian art favored symbols that referenced Christ's victory and divinity. The Chi-Rho, the fish, images of Christ as a shepherd over direct depictions of the crucifixion itself. The discovery that changed everything. According to tradition, Constantine's mother, Helena, traveled to Jerusalem around the year 326 and claimed to have discovered the actual cross on which Jesus was crucified, along with the nails. Whether this discovery was historically accurate or a politically convenient legend constructed to legitimize the new imperial religion is a question that has occupied historians for 17 centuries without resolution. What matters for this story is the consequence, the physical, tangible reality of the true cross, fragments of which were subsequently distributed to churches across the Christian world, as relics transformed the cross from an uncomfortable reminder of execution into a triumphant symbol of victory over death itself. By the 5th century, the cross had become Christianity's dominant visual symbol. By the time of the Byzantine and medieval periods, it was inescapable, built into church architecture, carved into tombstones, embroidered into vestments, worn around the necks of believers who, centuries earlier, would have found the practice almost unthinkable. The most recognizable symbol in Western religious history took roughly 400 years to become normal. The halo borrowed directly from the sun. Open any image of a saint, an angel, or Christ in Western religious art, and you will see a circle of light around the head. This image did not originate with Christianity. The halo, technically called a nimbus in art historical terminology, predates Christian art by well over 1,000 years. The earliest known examples of divine figures depicted with radiating light around the head appear in ancient Persian and Greek art, used specifically to represent solar deities and rulers claiming divine status. The Greek sun god Helios was depicted with a radiant crown, representing sunlight emanating from his head. Roman emperors, who frequently claimed divine or semi-divine status, adopted similar imagery, particularly visible on coins depicting emperors with radiating crowns. A visual claim that the emperor's authority came from the same source as the sun's light. The cult of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, was one of the dominant religious movements in the late Roman Empire, heavily promoted by several emperors before Constantine's reign, including possibly Constantine himself in his early years before his conversion. Sol Invictus was depicted with a crown of light radiating from his head, visually almost identical to what would later become the standard Christian halo. Why Christian artists adopted it. When Christian art began developing its own visual vocabulary in the centuries following Constantine's conversion, artists faced a practical problem. How do you visually communicate that a figure in a painting or mosaic is divine or holy or set apart from ordinary humanity? The existing visual language of divinity in the Roman world was the radiant halo. Rather than inventing an entirely new symbolic system, Christian artists adopted the existing one and filled it with new theological meaning. By the 4th and 5th centuries, halos appear consistently in Christian art surrounding Christ, then later expanding to include the Virgin Mary, angels, and eventually canonized saints. Different traditions developed specific conventions. Christ's halo often contained a cross within the circle to distinguish him from other holy figures. Square halos, less common, were sometimes used in Western art to indicate a living person depicted as holy donor portraits of patrons who commissioned religious artwork while still alive. The symbol that now instantly signals holy person to anyone familiar with Western art was for over 1,000 years before Christianity adopted it, a symbol of sun gods and god emperors. Christianity did not invent the visual language of the sacred. It inherited it and then redirected its meaning. Holy water and the Roman lustration ritual. Every Catholic church has a small basin near the entrance, usually built into the wall, filled with blessed water. Visitors dip their fingers in it and make the sign of the cross upon entering. This practice is called lustration in its pre-Christian form, and it is one of the oldest continuously practiced religious rituals in human history, predating Christianity by well over 1,000 years. Ancient Greek and Roman temples maintained vessels of water at their entrances specifically for ritual purification. Worshippers were expected to wash their hands, sometimes their entire bodies, before entering sacred space, a physical act symbolizing the spiritual cleansing required before approaching the divine. The Romans called these vessels aspersoria. Archaeological excavations of Roman temple sites have consistently uncovered stone basins positioned precisely where Catholic holy water fonts are positioned today, at the threshold, the transitional point between ordinary space and consecrated space. The early Christian church did not invent a new ritual. It continued an existing one, reinterpreting the theological meaning of the water from generalized ritual purity to specifically Christian baptismal symbolism, every encounter with holy water becoming, in Catholic theology, a small renewal of the baptismal covenant. The Hebrew tradition contributed an additional layer. Jewish ritual purification practices, particularly the use of the mikveh, a bath used for ritual immersion, provided theological precedent within Christianity's own Jewish origins for water as a vehicle of spiritual cleansing, independent of any Roman or Greek influence. What resulted was a fusion, a ritual practice with deep roots in both the Greco-Roman world. Christianity was spreading through, and the Jewish tradition Christianity emerged from, synthesized into something that felt, by the time it was standardized, entirely and uniquely Christian. Saint Benedict's cross and the Christian amulet tradition. The previous video on this channel explored how saints absorbed pagan mythology. What that video did not cover is what people actually carried. Throughout medieval and into modern Catholic practice, small medallions, crosses, and inscribed objects have served a function that, examined honestly, is structurally identical to the protective amulets found in nearly every pre-Christian religious tradition on Earth. The Saint Benedict medal is among the most striking examples, dating in its developed form to the medieval period, with roots tracing back to traditions about Benedict of Nursia in the 6th century. The medal is covered in Latin inscriptions, most of them abbreviated formulas believed to offer protection against evil, temptation, and what the tradition explicitly calls demonic influence. The medal's reverse side typically bears the inscription, Crux sacra, sit mihi lux. May the Holy Cross be my light. Followed by nec daemon, sit mihi dux. Let not the dragon be my guide. Using dragon as a direct reference to the devil, echoing the same serpent and dragon symbolism explored in the previous video's discussion of St. George and St. Patrick. Catholics have carried, worn, and placed these medals in homes, vehicles, and foundations of buildings for centuries with the explicit, stated purpose of warding off evil and misfortune. This is functionally the same religious behavior as wearing a protective talisman in any pre-Christian tradition anywhere in the world. The theological framing is different. The power is attributed to Christ and the cross, rather than to an independent magical force, but the underlying human behavior, the impulse toward carrying a physical object for protection against unseen harm, is continuous with practices that predate Christianity by thousands of years. The horseshoe and St. Dunstan. A specifically Christian legend attached itself to a much older European folk practice, hanging a horseshoe above a doorway for protection. The story, dating to medieval English folklore, describes St. Dunstan, a 10th century Archbishop of Canterbury who had trained as a blacksmith before entering religious life. According to the legend, the devil visited Dunstan's forge disguised as a customer requesting horseshoes. Recognizing his visitor, Dunstan nailed a red-hot horseshoe to the devil's hoof, causing immense pain, and only agreed to remove it after extracting a promise that the devil would never enter a home where a horseshoe was displayed above the door. The folkloric practice of using iron, specifically, as a ward against evil spirits, predates this legend significantly and appears across multiple pre-Christian European traditions. Iron was widely believed in folk religion to repel fairies, spirits, and malevolent forces independent of any Christian content whatsoever. The Dunstan legend functioned as a Christianizing layer applied on top of an existing folk practice, precisely the same pattern Pope Gregory had recommended for handling pagan temples 7 centuries earlier, now operating at the level of a single object rather than an entire religious site. The Rosary and its borrowed architecture. The Catholic Rosary, a string of beads used to count specific repeated prayers, is one of the most recognizable devotional objects in Christianity. The practice of using a string of beads or knotted cord to count prayers did not originate with Catholic Christianity. Repetitive prayer counted on strings of beads appears in Hindu and Buddhist traditions with documented history predating Christianity. The Sanskrit term japamala describes prayer beads used in Hindu devotional practice for counting mantra repetitions, with textual references suggesting use dating back over 2,000 years. Buddhist traditions developed parallel practices, with mala beads serving an almost identical structural function, enabling a practitioner to maintain an accurate count of repeated prayers or mantras without conscious mental effort, freeing attention for contemplation rather than counting. Islamic tradition developed misbah or tasbih beads, used for counting the 99 names of Allah and other repeated devotional phrases, with use well documented by the early medieval period. The historical relationship between these traditions and the Christian Rosary is debated among scholars. Some argue for direct transmission along trade and pilgrimage routes connecting the Middle East, South Asia, and Europe during the medieval period. Others argue for independent development, noting that the basic insight, physical objects, can assist memory and counting during repetitive prayer, is simple enough that multiple traditions plausibly discovered it separately. What is not disputed is the documented history within Christianity itself. Early Christian monks in the desert traditions of Egypt used knotted ropes to count repeated prayers as early as the 4th century, a practice that predates the developed Catholic Rosary by many centuries and likely represents an independent Christian innovation rather than direct borrowing. The fully developed Rosary, with its specific structure of 5 decades and associated meditations on the life of Christ and Mary, did not reach its standardized modern form until the late medieval period. traditionally associated with Dominican spirituality in the 13th century, though the historical details of this attribution are contested by modern scholarship. Whether through direct cultural transmission or independent parallel development, the underlying human insight that the body can assist the mind in sustained devotional repetition through physical, countable objects appears across essentially every major contemplative religious tradition on earth. The Rosary is Christianity's specific expression of something close to a religious universal. What this pattern actually reveals. By now, the pattern across every symbol in this video should be clear, and it deserves to be stated directly rather than left implicit. Christianity did not arrive in the world with a complete original visual language handed down from Revelation. It developed its symbols the way every religious tradition develops its symbols, through encounter with the existing cultures it spread among, through the practical needs of its earliest, most vulnerable communities, and through the slow theological reinterpretation of forms and practices that already carried deep meaning for the people being converted. The fish protected persecuted believers when the cross was too dangerous to display. The cross itself became central only after a political and military transformation gave Christianity imperial protection rather than persecution. The halo borrowed directly from the visual vocabulary of sun worship and divine emperorship that had dominated Mediterranean religious art for centuries before Christ. Holy water continued an unbroken ritual practice stretching back through Roman temple religion and Jewish purification law alike. The Saint Benedict medal and the horseshoe above the door performed the same protective function that amulets have performed in human religious behavior across every documented culture on Earth. The Rosary participates in a contemplative technology beads for counting repeated prayer that appears independently or through transmission across Hindu, Buddhist, Islamic, and Christian tradition alike. None of this diminishes what these symbols mean to the billions of people who use them with genuine devotion today. A symbol's borrowed origin does not invalidate the sincere meaning a living tradition has built upon it across centuries of use. But it does reveal something important about how religious meaning actually works. Symbols are not usually invented from nothing. They are inherited, repurposed, and filled with new significance by each generation and each tradition that takes them up. The fish that hid Christians from Roman persecutors and the halo that once crowned the head of a sun god are now part of a visual language so thoroughly Christianized that their origins have become, for most believers, simply invisible. That invisibility is not a flaw in the system. It may be the clearest evidence of how completely the transformation succeeded. A fish drawn in the dirt by people who could be killed for what it meant. A monogram carried into battle by an emperor betting his empire on a vision in the sky. A circle of light stolen from the crown of a sun god and placed, ever since, around the heads of saints. A basin of water that has stood at sacred thresholds since long before anyone called themselves Christian. A metal warning off a dragon that is also a devil. A horseshoe nailed by a blacksmith who became an archbishop. A string of beads whose closest ancestors are found in temples on the other side of the world from where the Rosary was finally assembled. None of these symbols fell from the sky. Every one of them was built, borrowed, adapted, and slowly filled with new meaning by people trying to make the sacred visible in a world that kept handing them materials already shaped by someone else's hands. That is not a weakness in the story of Christian symbolism. It may be the most honest thing about it. The holy, it turns out, has always been assembled from whatever was already lying around and then, given enough time and enough devotion, made to mean something entirely its own.